Executive Committee meeting of April 16, 2020. I will ask our Chief of Staff to do a roll call, please.
Got it. Okay. Alder Bidar.
Present.
Alder Bidar is present. Alder Harrington McKinney.
I'm present.
Alder Harrington McKinney is present. Alder Martin.
Here.
Alder Martin is present. Alder Evers.
Here.
Alder Evers is present. Alder Carter is an excused absence. Alder Foster.
Here.
Alder Foster is present. Alder Campbell.
Here.
Alder Campbell is present. Alder Balde.
Yes.
Alder Balde is present. Quorum.
We do have quorum. I'm going to turn it to Joe. I believe you are going to read some of the instructions.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
Welcome to our virtual Common Council Executive Committee meeting. We are going to cover a few basic items before beginning. To the members of the CCEC and city staff, the chair, clerk, and tech facilitator are responsible for muting and unmuting CCEC members. Please be mindful that during any roll call, all panelists will be unmuted until completed, at which time the chair will place panelists back on mute. Voting will be considered unanimous. However, if you object to a unanimous vote, please use the raise hand feature when the chair asks for objections. After clicking participants at the bottom of your screen, you can find the raise hands feature at the bottom of your participants list. Also, use the raise hand feature when you'd like to be recognized to speak or ask questions. This includes staff who are being asked a question. The chair will do their best to call on committee members in the order in which hands are raised. Lowering your hand will take you out of the queue. Please wait for the chair to unmute you before speaking. If you lose connection at any point during the meeting, you can reconnect by clicking the link or calling the number in your original email. If you are watching the live stream, please mute the stream now. There's a 30 to 40-second delay and the audio will cause feedback when you are unmuted. Members of the public who have registered to speak. When your name is called, the facilitator will find your name matching the name you provided in your registration and permit you to speak. If your name does not match, you will not be permitted to speak. Please wait until you are unmuted to begin talking. The clerk will tell you when your time is up. If you need to share documentation with the CCEC, please send it via email to allalders@cityofmadison.com. Unless there are questions of you, you will be unable to speak for the remainder of the meeting. In order to keep the meeting with the best quality we can, if you do not wish to speak, we encourage you to go watch the meeting streamed at cityofmadison.com/citychannel or at youtube.com/user/cityofmadison, or find us on Charter Digital 994 and AT&T Uverse 99. President Bedard, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Joe. The next item before us is public comment. Do we have anybody that has registered for general public comments?
No, President Bedard. We have 4 for items 5 and 2 registrants for item 6. That's it.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much, Kwesi. We now have disclosures and recusals. If any members of the body have any disclosures and recusals, please raise your hand. I see none. Thank you. We'll move now to our discussion items. The first item before us is item number 4, which is a discussion item on the template for the daily communication from the Council Chief of Staff. This item is before us based on the discussion at our last CCEC meeting. Our Chief of Staff has provided a template for possible consideration and discussion by us on how to do the daily roundup. So I will entertain any comments on that template by any members of the body. So if you have any comments, please raise your hand. I see no hands raised. Okay, Alder Furman, 1 second. Go ahead, Alder Furman.
Thank you, Council President. I'm curious of what the coordination is of those messages from our Chief of Staff and the Joint Information Center, and what would like just a little bit more detail or a little bit better understanding on how messages are going to be passed back and forth going forward, and have been, I guess, in the past a little bit, but just kind of what the plan is there.
Thank you, Alder Furman. Kwesi, I will turn it to you for a response.
Sure. So right now we have open lines of communication. Whenever I get requests from alders, I do submit it to the EOC. And when I get a response, particularly if I think the response will be something that could impact multiple districts and not just the district of the alder that's making the request, I usually add it to the round as well. So that's been the case. I also get information that I include from Hannah, the PIO, who's also pushing out information. I get some information from time to time from the mayor's office and blogs, and then Leslie, who's also kind of the intergovernmental affairs person, also shoots me messages pertaining to what things going on with the state. So I kind of include all those in the information that we get. So it's really comprehensive based on questions that alders may have that might impact everybody, that everybody would want to know, or specific questions, and then information coming from the news media or city staff.
Any additional questions, Alder Furman?
No, that's great. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? Alder Harrington McKinney.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So my question is to the Chief of Staff. You indicated if there are any updates, and so in your template, once we design the template, if there is no update, there is a holding space to say no update, because that way the alders will know specifically what that template looks like. And for that particular roundup, there is no new information. So I would ask you to consider that in having a template of those categories, whether it is the mayor, whether it is her staff. Once that is designed, we have the template, and as we look at it as alders, if there is nothing to update in that particular category, we know it's not missed, but you're identifying that you've had no conversations or updates. And so I would ask you to consider that.
Thank you, Alder Harrington McKinney. Kwesi, any responses to that, or you can just
yeah, it's duly noted. Usually, yeah, duly noted. I can definitely do that. If there are things that are coming up, say for example, coming up to the election, if there's word that we wanted to get out or word on the census, I tend to keep those on the template up until the time that the event has passed, just so it's a reminder for alders if they want to continue to put the word out. But yes, if there are no updates out, I can definitely make a note of that.
Great, thank you. Any other comments on the template? I see no hands raised. So I think that concludes then that agenda item. Kwesi, if you can then start using, I think, this format, and then we can obviously revisit at any time if there are any suggestions or feedback on some tweaks to it. Does that seem appropriate to the members of the body? Seeing no hands raised, I'll take that as a general agreement by members of the body. Great, thank you.
One point of clarification, should that template be embedded in the email, or would alders prefer it as an attachment Word document that they can copy and paste?
Any particular preferences? If not, I can, if you don't mind doing it both ways, that I think it's easy enough, and then it provides a flexibility for the alders. Would that be okay?
Yes, no problem.
Great, thank you so much. Alder Harrington McKinney actually had
No, I'm going to lower my hand because you addressed my question coming up. So I'm going to lower my hand. Thank you.
Alder Evers.
Yeah, I just wanted to express thanks and appreciation to Kwesi. I think this is a lot of work, and it's appreciated, your work on this. Thanks.
Great, thank you so much. And indeed, thank you, Kwesi, for your work on it. Okay, I'm seeing no other hands on this discussion item, so we can move to our next discussion item, which is item number 5, which is a discussion on the city council's role, process, and structure in regards to city's recovery from COVID-19 emergency. And I believe we do have a number of registrants on this item.
Yes, the first would be Brenda Conkle in support and wanting to speak. Should I just list out all the registrants and then?
No, I think we can take them one at a time. Ms. Conkle, will yield the floor to you for your testimony.
All right, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
All right, good. So I have so many concerns about what's going on within our homeless community and what's going to happen when what we've been calling the eviction tsunami happens. Right now, you know, all the nonprofits are trying to coordinate the best they can while trying to respond to all the emergency situations that we have. And the city staff is working very hard to try to, you know, respond to emergency needs. But our big question is what's going to happen, you know, in June when people are now 3 months behind on their rent. We don't have enough eviction prevention money. And, you know, that's going to lead to people being evicted, which is going to lead to an increase in the homeless population. Right now, we're seeing a huge increase in people who are unsheltered because people don't want to go to the shelter. And so there's a lot of people who are camping throughout the city, and we're seeing those encampments grow greater than what we've ever seen before. And so, you know, I'm hoping that the council will take some sort of a role in trying to address the huge needs that there's going to be around housing and around the homeless population. And with none of the committees meeting, it seems like there's no place to have these public discussions about it. So many of the people who are working in these roles are just inundated with the things they have to do all day, and nobody's sort of having the time to look at the bigger picture. So I'm hoping that the council can play some sort of a role in what happens in this regard. I also just wanted to put in a little plug for, you know, it's one thing to get a lot of eviction prevention money if we can get it out there into the community, but you still need the staff to be able to do that. And I think that like Legal Action in Wisconsin has one attorney at eviction court. And what's going to happen when there's just tons and tons of cases when the court hasn't been meeting for a couple of months, and you know, there's just going to be a wave of evictions that are going to be happening. So I'm just sort of asking you all to start thinking about when you're looking at the money that might be coming to the city from the federal government, the CDBG funds and others. I know there's probably going to be tremendous pressure on what happens with that money, but I hope that you think about what's going to be happening to the housing end of things and the homeless services end of things. And the other thing the thing that worries me probably the most is just thinking about what's going to happen when all these people who are in hotels right now, what happens when the day comes where the city has to kick people out and everybody has to go back to the shelters, and the shelters are clearly not adequate for social distancing, which we're probably going to have to do for quite some time. And so what's going to happen at that point? So I'm hoping this is on the council's radar screen. I'm hoping that, you know, either there's a task force to look at or some of the committees get opened up to start discussing some of these issues, because I think a lot of us see the problems coming and have no idea how to interact with city government or county government to help be part of a solution. So I'm hoping that the public can play some sort of role in it. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Conkle. If we can have the next registrant, and then we'll open it at the end for questions to registrants.
Yes, next we have Gail Bliss, neither in support or opposing, wanting to speak.
Gail,
Good evening. Yes, the Affordable Housing Action Alliance has a COVID-19 Next Steps subcommittee. On behalf of that subcommittee, I sent a message to all alders earlier today. Like you know, Brenda said, when the hotels have to be closed and everybody winds up going back to the status quo ante. It's not going to be the status quo ante because we'll still have the COVID-19 virus circulating in the city. There's no way to provide social distancing. We'll still have people who are sick. There's going to need to be some way to deal with those folks. With warmer weather coming and the increase in folks in tent encampments, we need an appropriate reaction from law enforcement. Telling people to move along when there's no place to move to is not helpful. So we're going to have to look at both the short-term issues and the longer-term issues of how we can address homelessness in this city. And the pandemic has highlighted how essential housing is to health and how inadequate the current shelter system is for dealing with life in the time of a pandemic. We might be looking at, as Brenda said, additional funding for supportive services for homeless persons. And we recognize that the city can't do this alone. The county and the city need to work together on this. And I guess that sort of ties into item 6 on the agenda. But it seemed enough of item 5 that I will just end with that we would like the city and the county to work together. And thank you.
Thank you. I see Alder Harrington McKinney, you have your hand raised. Would you like to, no longer, okay. Next public testimony, Crazy.
Yes, we have Heidi Wegleitner, not in support or opposing.
Heidi, the floor is yours. Ooh.
Hi. I hope you can.
It was a very appropriate blue screen.
Okay.
Yeah, so Heidi's actually using an older version of Zoom. That's why I had to promote her to a panelist for her to be heard. So just so you know.
Heidi, go ahead. We're hearing a little echo.
You can hear me okay though?
More or less. There is a lot of echo.
I wonder if maybe you should take someone else, and can I call in or no?
We can hear you better now.
Yeah, we can hear you okay now.
Okay. Okay.
Maybe disable
it's a little late on my end. Okay, maybe this will be better. So yes, I'm a member of the Affordable Housing Action Alliance, and I'm speaking today to you in my personal capacity, not on behalf of any organization. But I wanted to talk a little bit about the eviction tsunami, as it's been referred to, because of my experience representing tenants at the courthouse facing eviction. And because of the eviction moratorium, which has prevented most eviction cases from moving forward, there are 550 cases on average that would have been scheduled during the 11 weeks of the moratorium, that in a normal, a normal economy, I would just, expect those 550 cases to come to us this summer. But I really think that's like the minimum backlog that we are going to experience when the moratorium lifts in June. And obviously, people out of work, with reduced income and inability to pay rent, there's a big need for help, eviction prevention, homeless prevention funds, staff, as Brenda mentioned, and also advocacy, access to legal services. There's a federal law called the CARES Act that applies to a lot of federally assisted housing programs and protects tenants in housing with federally backed mortgages. The problem is a lot of tenants don't know about that act. They don't know whether or not they're in housing that's protected by that act. And they don't know how to assert their rights in a stressful and complicated legal process. There's also the state eviction moratorium. There's emergency orders from the presiding judge in Dane County, and there's the Supreme Court orders that impact proceedings. So an already complicated regime of local, state, and federal law is made even more complicated because of the COVID-19 and the different laws and orders that apply that have been passed since the public health emergency. So, you know, we have an eviction and affordable housing and homelessness crisis across this country, in Dane County, in the city of Madison before the pandemic. And it's really scary to think about what lies ahead post moratorium, when things quote unquote return to normal, if that would even be possible. And going back to normal isn't even really a good solution for folks who are housing insecure in Dane County, for folks who are on the brink of living in shelter, who are doubled up, or maybe are no longer doubled up because the family they were doubled up with you know, doesn't want them in and out of their homes and risking them to infection of COVID-19. So I really appreciate that the council is having this discussion and looking at how to play a role in this response. And I think, you know, consider me a collaborator on the county side of things because I think, you know, we really need to use this opportunity to think about new ways of responding to inequalities in our community and to meeting basic human needs like housing and like access to healthcare that are unmet in our community and unmet in ways with staggering racial disparities, as you know. So I hope we can be, you know, creative, appreciate the urgency of this crisis, and work together to support more, you know, City of Madison residents facing housing insecurity. So I hope you consider this one of your top issues, and we'll move forward earnestly to address these pressing problems and tap into the collective knowledge of the service providers, of the people with lived experience, and your counterparts in other branches of government and, you know, on the county board.
Thank you so much, Heidi.
Next, we have Marilyn Fail, not supporting or opposing, wanting to speak.
Alder Harrigan McKinney, your hand is up right now. Would you like to speak now or?
Would like to speak after the public comments. So would you please come back to me at the end of those comments?
Sure, thank you. Go ahead, Kwesi, I'm sorry.
Oh, no, that's fine. So Marilyn Fail, neither in support or opposing, wanting to speak.
Go ahead, Marilyn.
Hi, can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. Thank you for the opportunity to speak, and I appreciate you facilitating the public comment tonight. I'm part of the Affordable Housing Action Alliance group as well, and I just wanted to urge the City Council in its role in the COVID-19 to be proactive and not just look at the crisis that we have right now, but like the others from our group had mentioned, to also look ahead and be proactive in putting together a plan of what will happen once the social distancing is over. And because we really need to take care of our homeless population. And I think the city has done a really great job in the county. But once, as Heidi and the others have mentioned, once those limits and those rules are lifted, there's going to be a lot of problems and issues that need to get addressed. So it's good to plan ahead. And I wanted to urge the council to look to have other bodies meet as well. I think this touches on number 6, but like the City County Homeless Issues Committee and other committees that deal with homelessness, to because there's a lot of people at home, sitting at home, that want to help and do things. And I'm sure that these other committees that are active or relate to homeless issues could provide a lot of help and support and input. And I think the public is really concerned about this issue as well. And I also think this is a really important time to take up this issue and deal with it proactively, because sometimes in crisis situations, opportunities present themselves that didn't before, and you can look at things in a different way. Like maybe we should do things in a different way in the future. For example, I don't want this to happen, but if a hotel would, go under because of this, um, the loss of business due to COVID-19, maybe the city could look, or someone could look at purchasing a hotel to be to provide or open more supportive housing or SROs. So I just wanted to, I guess, urge the council to really be proactive. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Marilyn. Any other registrants, Kwesi?
That is it for this item.
Thank you. We'll turn it now to.
Oh, sorry, excuse me. Kwesi, someone did register on this item with the Legistar number, but they do not wish to speak and they're in support. And that's Janie Koester from Jennifer Street.
Great. Thank you. I'll turn it now to questions of the registrants. So the first holder is Alder McKinney. Go ahead.
All right, thank you, Madam Chair. My questions will be directed to Brenda Conkle. And I ditto everything. And Brenda, I want you to speak. I'm going to say a couple of things, and I want you to specifically address everything that I've heard from the speakers is just right on. And specifically, as we are dealing with the current situation, we really do need to look at long-term recovery, not just for our homeless population, but overall housing insecurity. And so many of the clients that I know that you have seen and the speakers have seen, have had these challenges before what we're facing now. So my question to Brenda is that how would you evaluate the collaborative efforts? I know that there are so many organizations asking for funding to help this resolve. And so I would like to have your opinion on number one, what are those collaborations now, what they look like? Are they meeting the needs? And then the third is that city county liaison collaborative work that we are all talking about. What is it now and what can it be? So 3 questions, and you can answer them in your own way. Thank you.
Brenda, you can go ahead and respond.
Okay. So unfortunately, it just like everybody else, that it's hard to know what's going on. Communication is really difficult. And I don't know to some extent what collaborations are going on and what is not going on. I don't think there's any city county collaborations right now. I know through the Homeless Services Consortium, there's like a homeless providers meeting every week. There's a like an outreach group meeting every week. And I think there's a third one as well that meets every week. And we get city and county updates, and then nonprofits share what they're doing. Most of that work has been around getting people into hotels and coordinating outreach, at least for the meeting that I've been going to, coordinating for everybody who's sleeping outside, because the outreach workers don't have any PPE. And few agencies are allowing their workers to actually go out and do that work. So the few that are doing it are really being overwhelmed. The other thing that's going on is that because so many of the services that folks rely on are shut down, you can't go to Luke House to get lunch. You can't, do the things that you would normally do. So the people who are doing the outreach are needing to coordinate all of that as well. So, I don't know what the other groups are doing. There's so many meetings and you can't go to them all. But I know that we do get updates that way. I don't know that there's any city, county, well, the staff are collaborating at the staff level. But it seems like the county is opening the checkbook and the city staff are doing the work. I'm not sure if that's accurate, but that's from my perception. That's what I'm seeing. As far as like eviction prevention funds, I know that there's been, several opportunities, grant opportunities out in the community, and many organizations went in together to get those funds. I don't know if anything has been announced yet about which agencies will be getting the funds or not. But my guess is it's just I'm so grateful that that money exists, but I have a feeling that it's just so minimal compared to the tremendous need that's going to be out there. So it's just kind of hard to even, I mean, they're trying to collaborate, but the needs are going to be so great. I don't know how people are going to respond to that. And I think there was a third question, but I forgot what it was.
I think you addressed the questions.
Okay.
Thank you so much. Next, we have Alder Rommel. Alder Rommel, questions for the registrants.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would ask Heidi in her role as Supervisor Wegleitner, like what are some of the things that she can share that the county is talking about in some of these areas, just so we're on the same page.
Heidi?
Thank you for the question, Alder Rummel. I wish I had more information from you. The City County Homeless Issues Committee has not met, and most of the, county committees really have not met. So we're in a transition time as well with, swearing in the new board next Tuesday. So I hope that we'll, soon be getting our new committee assignments. We've really been getting kind of one-way communication from the executive branch. And I really, think we need to be having a meeting like you're having right here to talk about what our role is in the emergency. And that has been frustrating for me. So I'm sorry, I don't have better information for you right now.
Thank you, Heidi. I see no additional questions for the registrants. So with that, I think we can turn it to a discussions of around the item, and just a reminder that what we really want to be discussing today is really our role, the processes and structures around it, and not get into the policies itself and the issues that we want to actually, how we want to tackle the issue, but really how do we create the structures around being able to tackle the issues. I hope that makes sense. I wanted to turn it to, I think, Alder Furman. Well, I have Alder Foster has his hands up, but I wanted Alder Foster, is this questions for Registrant? Do you, I'm gonna unmute you so you can tell me verbally, but do you mind if I turn it to Alder Furman and Evers to give us an overview of the document they drafted first, and then we can start a discussion based on that document?
Yep, that sounds good.
Perfect, thank you so much. Alder Furman or Alder Evers or both. So I have Alder Furman up. Go ahead.
Thank you, Council President. So I'm going to talk, hopefully people have had an opportunity to see what is very much intended to be a framework for discussion tonight, and not a completed project, but some ideas to put out there. We heard pretty clearly today from the registrants that there is absolutely a strong need for us to be focusing on recovery efforts, and I think that some of the ideas in this document certainly get us in a better.
Alder Furman, you cut out.
Okay, hopefully I'm back.
Yes.
Okay, so I don't know where I got cut off, but I was saying that this document is intended for a framework for tonight, to try to talk towards some ideas towards recovery group, and also give some goals and ideas. So I think hearing some of the policy discussion during the attendees coming up and talking about that, it's good to try to figure out how to wrap our arms around what exactly are we focusing on. So I think that's kind of the idea behind the goals, and realize that this stuff is obviously, we're not going to recover from this COVID-19 crisis overnight, and there's a lot of work that needs to be done to figure out what the next 6, 12, 18 months look like on a lot of different issues. So the themes that the overall themes that we were thinking for the creation of ad hoc recovery groups are focused on creating groups that are not permanent, but designed to address recovery efforts, including policy. Committee memberships will be comprised of alders, but members of related existing boards that are boards, committees, and commissions that are would be welcome to participate as non-voting members. All the meetings obviously would be open to the public. The committees would be focused on mitigating the long-term effects in our community. Alders would work together to determine tasks that one or two alders could do. So, divide around tasks with the idea that they would report back to the committee. We'll certainly need city staff help, but the idea here isn't for these committees to come up with long laundry lists of things for city staff to do. It's definitely for alders to get their hands dirty on tasks like researching, and I know the council office is doing this, I know staff has been doing this, but helping research additional resources in recently passed legislation, learning from previous responses, both locally and nationally, to economic downturns, learning what other cities are doing about COVID recovery efforts, learning from that stuff, determining possible changes to our local ordinances to aid individuals and businesses in recovery, and then working with the community to determine what additional resources do we need from the state and federal government, because the legislation that's been passed certainly won't be the last piece of legislation. I'm going to jump in just very quickly to the food one, and then I'll let Alder Evers talk if you'd like about some of this work as well. But the thought was that we would have a committee related to food. The related committees that we picked were Madison Food Policy Council, the Public Market Development Committee, Vending Oversight Committee are things to look at. And the idea there is to look at long-term food insecurities. And so again, some examples about looking at programs, talking to local entities about what some of their needs are, looking at farmers markets, access to surplus, looking at community garden, terrace expansion policies, and looking at public and private partnerships that could take place, again, focused on the long-term stuff. And before I turn it over, I just think the one thing that hopefully is clear as we talk about this work needs to begin as soon as possible. This is not work to just keep alders busy while response work is happening. This stuff is all stuff that is going to be very time consuming, and it's incredibly important. And we need to get working on it as soon as we can figure out the structure.
Great. Alder Evers, would you like to add anything to? the information? If you do, raise your hand. No? Okay. No hands raised. So, okay, we'll turn it. I think Alder, I can't hear you, so I don't know. So Alder Evers, I'm
He's trying
unmuting.
to speak, but yeah, there we go.
Okay, Alder
Well,
Evers.
thank you. Thank you. I'm sorry. I'm looking at the document here and I didn't have access to raising my hand. So I
Okay.
apologize for that. I want to thank Alder Furman for taking the lead on this, and I was honored to be able to assist. There are a lot of good ideas that we're able to generate just batting the concepts and kind of spitballing this. And so as Alder Furman said, this is by no means exhaustive. It's very much a rough draft. And we heard from the registrants tonight, there's a concern that some of it may in fact be due to a lack of information. There may be work currently being done by staff on these issues with the foresight that this is a challenge, a looming challenge that awaits us, but we don't know about that. So having these ad hoc committees provide an opportunity to drill down and find out what's going on, what staff is working on, what's being done in other cities, what avenues are available to us to be able to address them. And some of the other categories we talked about, you'll see here are housing. And you'll notice that we tried to break down the existing committees, as Alder Furman said, that are related. And again, there's quite possible we left something out, and this is again open to discussion with a series of goals under each one. Again, by no means exhaustive, but housing, for example, again, we're right off the bat talking about the homeless population and eviction prevention, and also mortgage assistance for landlords who are, have to pay their notes, and not everybody is a big bad landlord. Some of these landlords are going to be needing assistance themselves, and then ongoing challenges around affordable housing, because as was mentioned by at least one of the registrants, this is an ongoing crisis in our city. The extent to which is made all the more apparent by the coronavirus. The other categories, just briefly, we're looking at unemployment, and this unemployment and the next category having to do with small business somewhat dovetails. They kind of overlap a little bit. They're separate in some instances, but related. And then we go down to transportation, and then we wrapped up looking at community development and the community services, the nonprofits, and the work that are being done, or after-school programs, neighborhood centers, and trying to find out again what ideas and what work is being done, and say one particular neighborhood within the city that is working and perhaps can be replicated in other parts of the city as we respond to this crisis and commit ourselves to the recovery efforts. So again, this is just a very, very rough draft, but it's meant to proactively, not reactively, but proactively give council members a place to be able to dive in and work on the challenges, and work collaboratively with the mayor's office and city staff in coming up with viable solutions.
Thank you, Alder Evers. I have next Alder Heck. Go ahead.
Thank you. Because I was involved with some discussions this past week since we last met, and trying to pull some of these things together, I think it's important to note that even though we're saying that much of this is going to be long-term work, because COVID-19 is not something that's going to be 6 months or a year in terms of recovery, but I also think we all recognize that there might be things that we need to do now that are more immediate. So that's why we need to get cracking. This is going to be both have short-term efforts and long-term efforts, medium-term too. Just wanted to clarify that. Thanks.
Great, thank you. Alder Kimball. Go ahead.
Thank you. And thanks to everyone who's worked on this. I am really pleased that we've been meeting every week for the last couple of weeks. It really, I think it makes a difference. These conversations have moved along in ways that are open and transparent to, not only all council members, but the public as well. So really appreciate that. When I look at this proposal, there's a couple things that come to mind. One is the 2 years of work that we did in TFOGs. And a couple weeks ago, maybe 3, I don't know if it was 3 or 5 weeks ago, we passed a resolution to create a TFOGs working group to get on with those recommendations. And we haven't created that yet. And in this proposal, I see some kind of sort of thematic outline of some of the things we talked about in TFOGs. So I'm wishing we could talk about that working group could get going and build on that 2 years of work that was already done around thinking about how city government and residents on boards, commissions, and committees can organize ourselves better to do the work of the city in an emergency or not in an emergency. There was a lot of really deep thinking, a lot of research done in TFOGs, and a lot of great ideas there. So I really want us to not say, oh, it's an emergency time, we can't deal with that, when we really do need to deal with it. We really do need to reorganize how we work in city government. And I think residents need to be part of that. When I look at this also, I'm not really in favor of just alder work groups on issues like this. For example, when I look at the food committee and when I look at the goals and the work that 1 or 2 alders would do, to me it seems like a lot of wasted time, because on the Madison Food Policy Council there is so much expertise from so many different perspectives that under these goals they have at their fingertips. They don't need to research and identify state and federal programs. Like, that is known. So much is known. There's so much wealth in our boards, commissions, and committees of expertise and knowledge. And to me, I would like to talk about how we can. I do like the combos of the various committees, and for example, the housing. When the mayor took office last year, she talked about redoing all. How she's thinking about housing and how might we realign housing work and housing committees. And I think I really appreciate that about this proposal. But so I guess my recommendation would be, instead of assigning 1 or 2 alders to these areas, let's really think more deeply about how we can get these committees working together more with a shared agenda, perhaps having shared meetings with an agenda about these goals and others that have been identified, since we can now meet. Because I think, again, I just think of the issue areas I might be interested in. All of that work is being done in committees, or could be done in committees anyways. And I guess I don't understand the need to have separate working groups. I do understand the need for committees to perhaps do their work differently, and maybe alders could take the lead in the committees that we're on in helping to reshape that work. But I really do not want to lose that expertise that is already there, and people who are already working on things, members of boards, commissions, and committees, either in their day jobs or in their, avocations, they're already working on a lot of these things. They're already inventing solutions. And that is available for us to tap into to move forward as a city in our policy making and our planning. So I would advocate for that. And kind of on that note, and to address the speakers on this item, Alder Abbas and I met earlier today, and we'll be having regular meetings with Jim and Lynette and CDD and the beacon and porch light providers at the Warner Park Shelter and Captain Accurate to talk about how things are going there. And I was really reflecting that, and by the way, things are going really, really well there, exceptionally well. I mean, there have been 2 emergency situations there, but nothing, that's just, things that happen to humans wherever they live. But as far as the what's going on in the shelter, the providers and the people who are using that as home are really relieved to have such excellent conditions, much better conditions than the shelters that were there before. And the community has by and large been in support. There have been a couple issues with buses, but nothing really major. And again, I was reflecting that when service providers, when service providers, people like who work on the issue and the city work together and are given the resources they need to do what has to be done, we can really improve things for people, for the work and for people's experience. And I think we need to be figuring out, along with how we're going to reorganize our work, how to really drive resources to where they need to be, to where the greatest need is. So that's I'll end my comments with that.
Thank you, Alder Campbell. Next, we have Alder Foster.
Thank you. And yeah, thank you to Alders Furman and Evers for this. I think it was really, really helpful to get this conversation going. I also think that the focus areas and a lot of the goals that were listed out really resonate with me, and I think are should be priority areas that we're focused on. And as Alder Evers said, I think relatively quickly we really need to, and Alder Furman as well, we need to really get started on this, even though it's they're long-term issues. We need to get that work going. I had some similar thoughts to Alder Campbell in terms of a lot of the conversations that came out of the TFOGS group. For those that didn't follow along that closely, very much of the work of that group really focused around the board committee commission structure, and there were a lot of recommendations that came out of there. At a high level, I would say there was a lot of consensus on the need to reduce the number of boards, committees, and commissions that we have. That it's really not sustainable in the long run, and I think that's work that's ahead of us. I've also been reflecting with this pandemic and with the impact it's had on our ability to meet. It really feels like a good moment in time where I think somebody commented during the TFOGS conversations that it's impossible to get rid of a board, a committee, or a commission. I think we've got rid of 2 of them in the last year or so. But I think the work of the TFOGS group really pointed to something more significant and more sort of encompassing. And I do sort of wonder if this isn't a good opportunity for us to maybe take a bolder step in that reorganization. And I think it really melds with this conversation that we're having right now. I think similarly to Alder Campbell's comments, I would be really hesitant to create new ad hoc committees. Particularly, I guess I'll speak mostly about transportation, since that's one that I'm most directly involved with. There was another sort of long work effort that went into reorganizing what was an unwieldy number of board committee and commissions related to transportation really down to 2. And in thinking about our sort of COVID response and recovery, to me, it seems clear that the bulk of that work should land with the Transportation Policy and Planning Board. And I'm just really struggling to understand what a new ad hoc group would do that the Transportation Policy and Planning Board wouldn't do. And I think there's been a couple comments that about sort of the connection between staff, and that the intent with this is to not create more work for staff, and that it would really be about alders sort of doing that work. I again, I agree with Alder Kemble that, on that one, for example, we've got another, half dozen or more members of the community with representing all different sections of expertise related to transportation, with connections to all kinds of communities in Madison. And I would certainly want to tap into them and have them participate in this work, and not have it sort of reduced to a couple alders. We already have 3 alders on there. Certainly, if other alders wanted to participate, there'd be room at the table. But I don't it's hard for me to understand how the Transportation Policy and Planning Board would sort of continue on and not respond to COVID, not be directly thinking about COVID response, and then having another separate, different, new ad hoc transportation group that's doing that work. I think, similarly to how city staff has needed to be really flexible, has been redeployed in all kinds of ways. I mean, we saw that with the elections, and I think really saw a lot of success there of taking people that had nothing to do with the clerk's office, and they just jumped in and they did it. I think we really need to expect the same thing from our current BCCs. I think it needs to be a retooling. I think that this is sort of the definition of sustainability, is we can't expect that BCCs are going to go along and sort of business as usual, and now we create another 5 or 6 ad hoc committees to focus on recovery. Because again, this is clearly going to be 1 year, 2 years, 3 years of, this is going to change our society. And so the work of a transportation body related to COVID recovery will be the work of transportation for Madison for the foreseeable future. And I think we really need to go to those boards, committees, and commissions and set some expectations that we really need you to rethink what were your priorities, and really take on, in addition, explicitly, how is our community going to respond in this subject area to a COVID recovery. And I think we need to just let those bodies that are already in existence do that work and reprioritize their work, because it will require staff work, and it's just not practical. Just like we don't have infinite capacity as alders, neither does staff. And I think as a city, as both elected officials, as city staff, as board committee commission members, we are going to have to make hard choices, and to stop working on things and to start picking up other things that we have to deal with. So all of that to say, I really think we should use this framework and the priority areas and the goals, but really only think about creating new ad hoc groups if we can't accomplish these things within our existing structure. And I think if we can't, that may also point to some issues with our current structure. So, on the food front, it seems to me that the Food Policy Council should be able to be the primary leading body to deal with the goals that are listed there. On housing, if we have a landlord and tenant issues committee that can't take the lead on eviction prevention and rental assistance, I'm not sure what that group is doing. If we have a city county homeless issues committee that can't take on homeless population, I think if we don't have confidence that those groups can do this work, then it probably should prompt us to really look at a restructuring to be able to do that. So those are my comments.
Thank you, Alder Foster. I have next Alder Furman.
Thank you, Council President. This both this recovery work that I worked on, as well as what you'll see the survey in the next part, is very much influenced by the TFOG's work. So I'm not surprised people are picking up on that. I think the big question for this council is: do we want to do new committees just focused on this, or should we be reusing our existing committees? And I think in an ideal world, I absolutely agree. We need to get working on the TFOG stuff. We need to get working on this recovery stuff, and we need committees to continue to go. My concern is how much time in the day there is, frankly, and how much resources people have. If you take Transportation Policy Planning Board right now, their agenda consistently is packed with items, and my worry is that this stuff gets lost. And obviously, it's possible that that everything else on their agenda just gets put aside, but there are issues with that as well. I think the big focus on these being Alder-only committees wasn't to cut people out; it was to get them going. The intent isn't necessarily just to have one or two. That example had more to do with doling out tasks as an example, but I think there could be 3, 4, 5 people, alders on these committees. We absolutely should not be focused on duplicating work. My fear is if you take something like the Food Policy Committee, I have no idea how, I'll be honest, I have no idea how often that they get together, and I have no idea how often they can make quorum, but that's 23 members. And I fear that if we are trying to get going, if we're going to constantly rely on a group that is that large to have to get together and move, it's way harder than saying here's a group of 3 or 4. But hey, everybody on the Madison Food Policy Council, you would be considered in Zoom speak a panelist. Please come on here. These are tasks that if you know about, we'd love to have you help us with and take lead on that. There's no problem with that. I certainly don't want alders trying to reinvent the wheel or duplicate work that other people are doing. But really the key focus on the idea behind the ad hoc recovery groups is to get moving quickly. And so if the council would prefer to see us just stick with the existing committee structure, with the recognition of what we've heard from IT, that it's going to take a while to keep getting things going because of how long it takes to make sure everybody can get connected and understands how the process goes, and are we going to get quorum in all these meetings, etc. That's fine. I think the survey is going to give us a lot of help with some of the big questions that we saw in TFOG, which is, frankly, most committees don't have any sort of accountability. And so that survey, and we'll talk about that next, is going to help give people a better picture on what committees are working on and how they can help with this effort. But obviously, I'm a big fan of the idea of starting up these temporary ad hoc committees, even though I cringe at the idea of more committees. I think it just gives us the ability to really get going as quickly as possible. Thank you.
Thank you, Alder Furman. Next, I have Alder Harrington McKinney.
Thank you, Madam Chair. First, I'd like to commend those alders who took the lead in bringing this before us for a discussion. And so I have several areas, and I'm going to kind of go through them one by one. Last night, I had the opportunity virtually to be present at the Transportation Commission meeting, and I was so very impressed with the chair, the organization, and the members that gave input in that. And I said that, my goodness, what an excellent representations of what BCC should be all about. And I left there thinking they were certainly accountable for the work. So I didn't get a chance to commend them. And the reason that I bring that up is that it is not about the boards, committees, and committees not doing their work. And so that was mentioned last night. I see it as an opportunity to open up that work to alders who are not assigned to the existing boards, committees, and commissions to be a part of the work. the mayor makes the appointments to these committees, and oftentimes being not appointed to the committee. And I know alders can absolutely be a part of a committee if they choose to be one. But the strength that I see in broadening the opportunities for alders to be engaged in the recovery work. And that's how I see it. It's not negating the work of any of the committees, but it does give the opportunity to be collaborative and for alders to get involved in really sitting on and diving in. And I've heard so many times is that the alders have the responsibility of really, leading and governing and making decisions about what happens to our city. So it opens up that opportunity to continue the work and bringing expertise of those alders who may not be assigned to that committee to really become engaged in that. As far as the TFOG recognizing the 2 years, I think the alder said, of working on that, and I acknowledge that. But this whole recovery and how we're going to be, there will be no norm. I mean, our norm is different, but it really gives us an opportunity as alders to be a part of the work going forward and how we frame that work. And it, as I said, it just opens up the opportunity for alders to get engaged. And so I certainly thank the members who brought this together, but it does give us an opportunity of widening the scope, because we must begin to look at how we do our work differently, how we expand our work, what we have, and is it what we wanted to be going forward. And so those are my comments, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much, Alder Harrington McKinney. Next, I have Alder Martin. Go ahead, Alder Martin.
Thank you. I also want to reiterate my thanks to all the alders that worked on this proposal. It looks like it was a substantial amount of work, and I thank you guys. I think when I see this proposal, what I see is what I see is a chance for at this point in time to kind of get our committees out of their silos. And part of the work that the alders who are assigned to, whichever let's see, like each ad hoc recovery group, part of it would be reaching out to those committees. Like Alder Kemble said, the wealth of knowledge on the Food Policy Council is incomparable. And we would be remiss if we did not work with them, making sure that we are connecting the right organizations and people and not duplicating work. But again, at the same time, I think that this is a really good opportunity to kind of get a jump start on things, and also work more collaboratively in this kind of emergency situation, understanding that perhaps issues with quorum are going to come up with certain committees, but we can still keep moving. And these committees are then their work is again not done just this is the Food Policy Council work, this is the vending oversight group, just to use that as an example, that it really is a collaboration, and we can move forward as quickly and deftly as possible. So thanks.
Thank you, Alder Martin. Next, I have Alder Rommel.
Thank you. And again, also thanks to everyone for thinking and bringing this to us to have a deeper conversation. I guess I'm a little bit stuck and thinking, why would we do ad hoc committees when we've been talking for a year about committees and we have too many, and how do we stop that? And so it seems like now it's being framed as either we have this ad hoc committee or we slowly get back to quote normal. But maybe somewhere in between is, I mean, I worry about these small little groups, and it's not a public meeting, it's not transparent, like a couple alders meet. And there will be people like, well, what did you know, what's going on? What are you doing? What are you thinking? So could we have a couple alders take up, say you're on a committee, say you're on the Food Policy Council, or say you're Arvina. Maybe your Arvina or people in the food area could convene a plenary, a public, and you would have to work with staff, but invite people in this area and have a public listening session. Say, here are the 3 things we have: short-term needs, we have medium-term needs, and we have unknown future needs because we don't know how the world's going to change. And that way it would be more of a public inviting thing and less of a formal meeting. I mean, it's hard to get committees out of their silos because they have rules about what they're they're kind of governed by silos. But if you had a different model, instead of like inward alder thing, where I feel like we would spend a lot of time finding out what other people already know. But so let's get what people already know and bring it in a way that's, you know, like a public hearing or a listening session. Because so that's my major idea. And then I would ask the city attorney, like, I know there are, like, on the planning commission, they want to have a little subgroup, and it's okay, but nobody's going to know about meeting that's publicly, you know, motivated or announced. So I just want to know, what is the, like, this ad hoc thing would really be limited, and we wouldn't know what each other were doing until when do we report back and how? So I do like appreciate they get us the conversation started, but I'm not totally sure if it's the only choice we have. And so let's keep thinking. Thank you.
Thank you, Alder Rommel. Next, we have Alder Rohr. Alder Rohr. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. So I guess in response to first Alder Rommel's concerns, it was my understanding of Alder Evers and Alder Furman's proposal that it actually would be public. It would all be subject to the same public open records laws that all meetings are. And actually, the listing of the BCCs underneath is kind of to include that expertise that you're talking about that we have in the community in a more informal way. So kind of like Alder Furman was saying, having a meeting like this where the alders who are in the food ad hoc committee are in this Zoom meeting, along with members from the Food Policy Council and the other BCCs that are related to that area, all having a collaborative conversation about what we can do as a city. And then I think in response to what I heard a lot of alders saying about, you know, bringing back BCCs versus this ad hoc structure, that is something that I talked to Alder Furman and Alder Heck about, and we realized that BCCs are a wealth of knowledge, and we kind of have these 2 options: bring them back slowly or use this ad hoc structure, and that we don't have enough information from the committees themselves about their capacity to, you know, initiate policy on their own if we brought back the BCCs, which is kind of why we created this survey that we'll be talking about next, to kind of grasp what their capacity would be to either fit within this bringing back the BCCs to do the recovery work, or whether they think they can fit within these ad hoc structures that we've thought of. So I hope that through talking about the survey, we'll kind of be able to parse out what committees' capacities are and answer that question of whether we should just bring back the BCCs or whether we use the ad hoc structure. Thanks.
Thank you, Alder Rohr. Next, I have Alder Evers.
Thank you, Chair. I appreciate the comments of colleagues about the notion of collaboration. It's my understanding, and kind of the way I picture this, is that alders participating in volunteering or assigned to these ad hoc committees would not function in lieu of BCCs, but in a collaborative, but also in a collaborating and coordinating, because with specific agendas and specific goals that are targeted to recovery for BCCs that are not currently meeting, but may able to, not meeting on a regular basis, but might be able to be stood up for a specific need, that alder or those alders who are on that ad hoc committee can help coordinate that effort. As more committees get stood up, the ad hoc committee can help keep things on the top of the agenda or within the purview and the focus of the particular BCC, the committee. So it's the notion that with the same kind of nimbleness and fleet of foot that we were entrusting the executive branch of our government, we are saying that the legislative branch, working collaboratively, working in a framework that's a little bit less tied down to the conventional BCCs that have some issues meeting in their full glory. Right now, in the immediate moment, we can start coordinating and interfacing with staff, interfacing with the mayor's office, interfacing with the wealth of knowledge in the committee members on these BCCs. And lastly, I'll just say, maybe I'm rambling, it's not like a either or kind of situation. It's not either we do these ad hocs or we do BCCs. I see it more of as a both and, that we can do both of these and we can do it in a coordinating, collaborative manner and really keep focus on this task of recovery in this hour of need.
Okay, thank you, Alder Evers. Next, I have Alder Foster. Go ahead, Alder Foster.
Thank you. Yeah, just a couple quick points. So one, I think somebody maybe alluded to this, but if one of the goals here is to improve coordination between multiple bodies that might be dealing with an issue, I think we should also perhaps consider using CCC as a coordinating space and still having the groups working on things, but having sort of more transparent reporting back, and maybe have CCC hold for the priority list of these issues so that we do have some overall accountability. So that's one idea. Another idea that I think somebody else mentioned was to have some of these meetings some of these BCCs have some joint meetings. So TPPB and TC, for example, has already, we basically have been on a path to do 2 joint meetings per year, exactly to try and address this, pre-COVID. So I think that's, if there's value in having the Food Policy Council and any other food-related bodies have better coordination, I think that would be another avenue to do that without creating a new and separate body. This is again something that was it was one of the primary issues that TORC was wrestling with when it came up with its recommendation to go from 5 or 6 transportation-related bodies down to 2, is that having more doesn't improve coordination, it actually makes it more difficult. So I really, again, I think adding on another body that's somehow going to be a coordinating body, they're going to be off talking about stuff, doing something. Meanwhile, the other ones are doing their thing. And it's just, I think, actually going to potentially make things more difficult to coordinate. The other concept, I think, in my experience, quorum issues are actually much worse and more difficult with smaller bodies. So if these are really going to be 3 or 4 or 5 members, 1 or 2 people can't make it and that meeting's canceled. While it seems like having Food Policy Committee meeting might be difficult, I don't know what quorum issues they've had, but you can have several people that can attend and you still have a quorum and you still have a meeting. So I'm not convinced that having small bodies is gonna be an improvement on that front at all. And then I think my last point would just be, I really liked the survey, and I think we'll be moving on to that conversation quickly, but I think for sure we should hold on making any decisions until we get some of that info back, because I think that will be really instructive for us, and maybe we explicitly ask some of these questions in that survey as well, because maybe it will point out that, yeah, in some of these core areas, maybe we have the capacity to do this work with our existing bodies, and maybe in 1 or 2 of the areas we don't, and maybe that will help inform a decision. And maybe it's not an all or nothing. Perhaps it's not we create five of these new ad hoc groups, but if we identify that we don't have the coordination or the capacity within our current BCCs, following what we get from the survey, perhaps that would help identify 1 or 2 areas that might benefit from an ad hoc group. Thanks.
Thank you. Is it okay if I speak I don't have my hand up because I can't do a hand up for all of you. But if it's okay, I'm going to try to kind of see if we can maybe summarize some of the information so that we can move on onto the next item and the survey. So I want to kind of amplify what Alder Evers said about it's not either or, but kind of an and. So here is, and I also want to first thank very much the alders who did work on this proposal, because I think it's a lot easier, as we can see in our conversation, to have a conversation around some framework so that we can get more specific. So one thing that I think may be helpful is that as we see these clusters of committees that are working around, again, these broader areas: food, housing, unemployment, small business, community services. If every one of these committees has a number of alders on them, and so the idea of maybe, again, creating times in which either these committees can meet together, as Alder maybe Foster was mentioning, like the TC and TPBB have already planned on doing, but they can meet together, and the alders that sit on those 2 committees, some are the same, some are different, but it usually ends up being 3 to 4 alders. If you start looking at all these clusters, it ends up being 3, 4, sometimes 5 or 6 alders, which means that for those alders to actually then be meeting separately, there does need to be a public notice, because we usually start getting over 5, which means we have a quorum issue. So I think part of this proposal was considering that if you put 3 committees, and then you look at those 3 committees and the alders that sit on them, and those alders want to meet outside those committee meetings to summarize maybe some of the discussion that is had in those meetings, and then come back with some policy ideas, because in between committees, again, there needs to be designated people doing work, and bring maybe back the idea for the next meeting of that group of committees to react to. Those groups of alders working together, that will have to be noticed, because, and I don't know if Attorney May, Attorney May can chime in, but again, I do feel, one, it'd be good because it's transparency for those group of alders meeting together to be noticed, and 2, again, very quickly, as you look at this committee, you realize that you're going to have 5 or 6 alders meeting to talk about these issues. So I think that was, and I don't want to speak for Alder Furman or Alder Evers and Alder Rohr and Heck who work on it, but I think that was kind of a little bit of that idea of that construct of what they're proposing, that alders would have to come together to discuss issues that are clustered. And then I do think that what Alder Foster said, which is CCC, would be the place where it would all kind of funnel in, so that they would be actually reporting to CCC, hey, in the food area, these are the policies that are being talked about right now. In the housing area, these are the policies that are being talked about right now. I will point out that is work that we're not doing right now at all. That we actually are indeed pretty siloed in the work that we all do, and we all gain certain expertise from the committees that we're on, but we don't have oftentimes collective policy discussions. It is only on some items when they hit the council and they end up being a little controversial that we get into those discussions, but oftentimes even those are reactive discussions to something that's before us. So that's kind of how I see it. Again, I'll take the example of the area that I kind of know more about, which is like the community development and community services. Again, community development, again, I'm going to speak from my own knowledge. I think there is 3 alders on community development. There is 2 alders on community services. For those of us that are on those 2 committees to meet, that's 5 of us. So it means that we are really actually then an ad hoc group of alders talking about community services and human services, and I think we would want to make that a public meeting under open meeting law so that we don't violate any quorum issues. So that is kind of my perspective on the issue. I don't know, Attorney May, if you have any feedback or opinion on this kind of, from the open meeting law perspective. If you do, can you raise your hand? If you want to say something. Or nod your head. Okay, you do raise your hand. Okay. Go ahead, Attorney May.
Yeah, thank you. First, there was an assistant city attorney who used to be in the office who liked to call himself the 21st Alder. I've never thought that I wanted to be called that, both for my protection and yours. So it was nice to have you call me that, President Shiva, but I don't go there. I've found this proposal and a similar one that Plan and Sustainability Committee, I think, are talking about to be very difficult to parse under the open meetings law. I can't tell when people are setting up subcommittees, when these working groups are formal or informal. And I just think it's rampant with the possibility of unintended violations. And the more you can make sure everything is open, that's good. But I think it's, at least from my perspective, from the legal perspective, the more you can work through existing committees, sort of some of the things that Alder Foster and Kemble and Rummel talked about, and some others, I think, that makes it easier, because you've got a structure where you can notice the meetings and you know how it's going to work. And if you can work through those, to the extent you begin to set up all kinds of new groups, every time it happens, our office is going to have to look at it and say, is this a governmental body? Do you have to notice it? Do you not? And then if you do, then it's got to get into Legistar, et cetera. So just from the legal perspective, there are an open meetings law perspective, there are a lot of issues here as you go down this road in a way that at least I so far haven't quite been able to understand all the details of it and whether there are issues or not. So just a bit of a warning that it's something that I think we need to keep our eye on as you go forward.
Okay, thank you, Alder. Here I go again. I'm definitely promoting you to Alder. Maybe after I'm going to run for Alder. So next I have Alder Kemble. Sorry. Go ahead, Alder Kemble.
I have to unmute myself because I was
unmuted.
Okay, here I am.
Yeah.
Yeah, so on that issue that Attorney May just raised, that's another problem with this small, 3 Alder ad hoc groups, is that 2 of those alders, as Alder Bedar raised, 2 of those alders can't meet and talk about the issues that they're working on outside of the publicly noticed meeting without posting notice. And that will be even more of a burden. And if these are public meetings that IT is going to have to support, that's going to increase the burden and delay the time that our regular BCCs can meet if we have to support 6 brand new groups to do work. I just don't think it's really, I don't think it makes good sense to establish, 5 or 6 new bodies. I think it makes a lot of sense for us to talk in CCEC, as we're doing tonight, and as we'll do next week, and as we could do more frequently if we wanted, to talk together about how we envision this work being reorganized, and how we can to create new ways to get the work done faster, involve more people, and really have a better, more sustainable outcome. I loved what Alder Rummel said. I think that's a great idea. Let's kick this off by, maybe CCEC having a number of, 5 or 6 open listening sessions where we invite, where it would be a meeting of the CCEC, and we invite all the people from these different issue areas to come and brainstorm with us. I think that's a fabulous idea. And then CCEC can take that all back and figure out how we want to organize that work. But again, I don't think the idea of the 3 alders in 6 subcommittees is really going to. I don't see how that's less work. I just don't see how that's less work for anyone.
Okay, Alder Hennick.
Say thank you to those that were doing the work on this. What I see though is that we've been informed many times now that the IT department is heavily strapped for the number of meetings that we're able to do and what we're able to hold up currently. And there are a number of committees that aren't meeting. For instance, the Parks Commission is pushed away out until May. We've had a couple of things that we'd really like to get on the agenda. The CDBG, we've got issues that are coming for approval to the council without going through the CDBG committee. The Municipal Golf Committee, which is really important, I feel, for this coming year's difficult budget, hasn't met yet. So I feel like for a long-term problem, this is another short-term solution to a long-term problem. We need to get our BCCs under the structures that we have in place up and running more effectively and put this work through the systems that we already have in place. I don't think more committees is the answer. And I really like the idea of listening sessions because getting the public back in the decision-making process, I feel, is essential. Thank you.
Alder Heck.
Thank you. I guess, there's a variety of opinions floating around here about this very draft proposal that was put out there. And the idea was to get this discussion going and see where we might end up. In my mind, we're not quite where we need to be yet. There have been some really important points raised about public meetings, how to make sure that the expertise of our BCCs are used appropriately, and that and frankly, there is some worry, I think, about alders just going off in a corner, open meetings or no open meetings, and making decisions about important policies where we need to make sure we have a very open process. So I can see trying to come up with some sort of a hybrid of these various options. I mean, it's if we're gonna think we're gonna get all BCCs up and running and contributing in regular meetings to the recovery process, I think we're going to be limiting ourselves to not being able to do a lot of the things that we need to be able to do in a relatively short period of time. It could be quite a few months before that we can really get going again. Who knows? I don't know for sure. We're going to talk about that, I think. But I could see where in these groupings of committees, for instance, we could use one of those committees as the vehicle for the public meetings and invite the other committees that are in that group rather than having this separate ad hoc committee, perhaps. So we're utilizing the structure and the capabilities of one of the key committees in those groups, and they can informally, publicly, and on their agendas grapple with some of these bigger problems. I don't know, but I feel like we can find a way that will address a lot of the concerns that were addressed, that were brought up tonight. I'm not sure if I have the answer right now, but I think given another few days to take what we've heard here, we can fine tune this and come up with a couple of better ways of doing things.
Thank you, Alder Heck. So thank you. So in the spirit of like moving us along in this discussion, one, I do want to let alders know that usually we do not have a CCC meeting on the third Tuesday of the election year, but we will be having a CCC meeting. I think I don't hear anybody now wanting to have it. We will have to end that CCC meeting in time for our IT staff to then be able to set up for the council meeting. So you'll get details about that. But what I'm hearing is that there are the alders that have kind of worked on this, maybe can, with the feedback of others that were given here and maybe other emails that you can send, can refine, for lack of a better term, this proposal and bring it forward. What I didn't hear from any of the alders is whether these areas, these buckets, are actually the buckets that everybody thinks are the priority buckets for the work. And the reason I ask that is because that dovetails into our item number six, I think, yes, which is the discussion on which BCCs we want to have come start meeting in the next kind of tier of meetings. So I don't know if there is any comments about the buckets, or if there is anything missing, or whether these, again, groupings of areas make sense to people. So if they don't make sense and there are comments, please speak now. So I have Alder Rummel with her hand up.
Alder Hennick sort of inspired an idea in me, and I know it's common for Transportation Commission and the TPPB to have joint meetings. Would it be worthwhile to have some joint meetings as CCEC in our week? If, say, Parks Commission needs to do something right away, could they come in at a certain point in time in our meeting, or your meeting, I'm not really a member, do their thing and leave? Just an idea. I see. Thanks.
Thank you. Alder Foster. Go ahead, sorry.
Thanks. Yeah, I one area that was on, I think it was listed on the draft survey as a potential focus area was public health. That seems like an obvious one, but I don't think it was listed in the document that we've been looking at. So that would be one that I would put on the list.
Okay, thank you. I don't see any other comments about kind of the bucket. So if that's okay, then we can move to the last item we have on our agenda, which is the discussion on the tiered prioritization of board, commission, and committee meetings. So there were two documents that were sent as part of this discussion. One was a draft survey to be sent to chairs of committees that was drafted by Alder Rohr, Heck, and Furman. Thank you so much for drafting it. And then a list of all our committees, our BCCs, and the council, and then kind of a highlighting of what another grouping of committees would look like that we would want to have start to meet as soon as they could start meeting. So I'll open it up for discussion.
Council President, we have one registrant for item 6.
Okay.
Uncle in support.
Sure, go ahead, sorry. Is the registrant wishing to speak or just registering in support?
Yep, it's Brenda Conkle. She's unmuted.
Okay, go ahead, Ms. Conkle.
All right. I'm sorry. Last time I spoke, I hadn't realized there was these extra materials that were on the agenda, and so I've been quickly looking at them as you guys have been talking. And I would have changed my testimony a little bit in the first item, but I had registered primarily because of I'm super concerned that we do need some of the committees to be meeting. CDBG and community services were the ones that I was primarily thinking about, but also I find it sort of ironic that public health and public safety wasn't one of the buckets that was considered, especially because one of the things that Public Safety Review Committee have been talking about is the lack of having an emergency management department for the city of Madison. And that was one of the issues that we have been talking about off and on, and that Deputy Mayor Cam McClay had suggested that we start looking at. So I do feel like there's lots of things that Public Safety Review Committee could be talking about, not so much as in the recovery mode, but in the issues right now mode. Some of the committee members have been forwarding various issues to me, and I have nothing to do with them at this point. On the committee chair survey, I've been trying to run the committee sort of small d democratic, because there's a diverse group of people who are in that group who I would say not all of us agree on which direction to go. And so I've been trying to really make sure that all the committee members get a voice. And if this is just sent to the committee chair to fill out the survey for the committee, I feel like without having our committee be able to meet, I would not be fully representing what members of the committee think. And because I don't feel like there's a way without violating open meetings law or walking quorum kind of things that I can really get the information that I would need to fill out the survey on behalf of the committee members. We might be a little bit unusual because we're a little bit in the middle of determining what we're doing and what we are most interested in. The other thing I wanted to mention is that part of the reason why I wanted to be on the Public Safety Review Committee is because of the huge role that the police play in housing and homeless issues. And they weren't mentioned in the group of people who would be talking about housing issues. And I think that is a little bit of a mistake. I really would like to see the Zoom managed meetings be able to start happening as quickly as possible and have them all be recorded, because then people who can't attend the meetings could at least see once what happened there. And then the other thing I just wanted to say is that, committees don't just feed information to the city council. They also play a lot of roles in the community that aren't maybe necessarily legislative. They provide a lot of public information and education. The media writes about issues that are discussed in committees and gets ideas out there into the public. And they do also have a role in advocacy. And one of the issues that my committee members emailing me about today was about how we should be taking a position to support our police and fire folks who don't qualify if they get COVID. That's not workman's comp. And so there are issues that maybe are not specifically common council related, but that roles that our groups can play that might not be thought about. And then the last thing I just want to say is that one of PSRC's major roles is about the budget. And one of the things that we wanted to do this year was really be starting to talk about the budget. And we're not able to do that. And then the last thing that I had is that I'm just concerned that I think, COVID-19 has brought up so much about racial disparities. And it seems to me that the EOC is one of the committees that should be meeting and talking about recovery and what kinds of things. I mean, they play a huge role in housing as well, fair housing specifically. And I feel like that's another committee that should be meeting. I guess I'm a little confused by the explanation of what the committees do, especially the ones that were listed as unemployment. I think that early childhood care is another one that perhaps should be meeting because of the childcare issues that are current right now, not things that are about recovery, but the current issues that we're facing. So that was a lot, and I just really appreciate that you guys are having this conversation. I don't think I feel a little bit like Alder Heck. I don't know that I know exactly what the answers are, but I do think that if the committees would be allowed to start meeting, we would get better feedback and information about if there was a different way that things should be structured at this point. So thank you.
Thank you. So let me again frame this discussion again, because I want us to just try to make some decisions or at least move the issues forward. I will say again what I said at the last meeting. If I had a magic wand and I didn't have to meet 3 times to talk about how every one of us want every committee to meet again, I would do it in a moment. But that is not where we are. I hope that you all also read the very long and great memo by Sarah Edgerton about the IT piece of the committee's meeting. So I don't think anybody denies that every committee has a role right now to play, but we need to try to get to 2 places. One, an agreement or not about whether we want to do a survey of the chairs, and if we do, what's the feedback on the draft survey, and 2, whether there is a group of committees that again, I put forward a group of it in that document. Is there maybe 1 or 2 additional ones that people want to feel strongly about that we should add to that so that we can at least schedule their meetings, because they won't be scheduled at least until May. So I just want to do some reality check around that. So with that, I will open it up for the comments on those two issues. So one, the survey for the chair's feedback and whether we should send it, and then the committees that are proposed to come online. Alder Harrington McKinney.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll speak first on the survey response just for the chairs. Brenda Conkle really addressed my concerns because the chair represents the body, and it is really important that there's input from the body. The body is the membership of that respective board, committee, or commission. And so I would open that up and have the chair respond, but also to go to the various, and I'm speaking specifically in one of the committees that we sit on is the Public Safety and Review Committee. And so that survey should be sent not just to the chair, but also to the members, because if the chair does not have an opportunity to, to communicate with the members, that is a downfall. And so I would open that up to the members. The second is that the Public Safety and Review Committee should be on that list. And the reason that I say that is the fire and police, they are the first responders, and they have their hand on the pulse of what's happening within our city. There was public information for all that we read. We received it today, and what their concerns, and they are the first responders, and they report to the Public Safety and Review Committee. And for that committee not to be active and listening to what the needs are to first responders, I think is an error. So I would definitely add the Public Safety and Review Committee to that list. The other that I would add to the list is the EEOC. And I specifically want to add that because what we're hearing is the disparities across the board. And so to not have those discussions and looking at where those disparities are and addressing those and having an ongoing active conversation around that issue is also a mistake. And so EEOC also needs to be added to that list. Thank you.
Thank you, Alder Rohr. Oops, sorry, Alder Rohr.
Okay, cool. So after our meeting last Thursday, I think Alder Heck brought up that, like, as a council, we could try to rank the committees. So I started working on a spreadsheet with the help of President Bidar, trying to list all the BCCs, their staffing needs, their IT needs, their statutory responsibilities, and trying to come up with a scientific way to do it. And what we realized is that we just don't have enough information. And if we tried to fill out all these things, we would be making a ton of assumptions about the committee's capabilities, what projects they were working on, and if they thought they had a role in the covert effort. So that's kind of where the survey came out of. And I think it's going to be a really great way for us to tackle a bunch of concerns that people have brought up in this meeting, both the need for maybe ad hoc committees or, a general deep dive into what committees are even working on and how they can tailor their committees to the COVID recovery efforts. So I'm really interested in hearing what other alders think about the survey and feedback on the questions. And I guess I'm interested to hear more about what Alder Harrington McKinney and Brenda Conkle were saying about giving it out maybe to all members and whether people think that's a good idea or not. Thanks.
Thank you, Alder Rohr. And thank you for your work on that spreadsheet. Alder Foster.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think doing a survey is a great idea. And I think the draft looks really good to me. I think there were a few things brought up tonight that could probably just be incorporated in there. In terms of asking all the committee members versus the chair, I mean, it certainly changes the scope and the timeline and everything else there. I think one thing that might be useful, and I think could happen without any without having it to be too complicated, is the chairs certainly could, particularly with the administrative staff for that board committee commission, they could certainly just reach out to their members and say, please, one-way communication style, just send, if you have any ideas of how our work moving forward would be related to COVID response and recovery. I think that could help sort of at least bring that information to the chair in case there are some really good ideas from different members of the bodies that the chair is not thinking of, because I think that is one of the key things we really want to get from the survey is how could these board committees and commissions be relevant in the work we talked about with the previous item. In terms of I think the question, Alder Badar, that you asked about sort of which ones should be next. I think, based on the memo that Sarah wrote, which I thought was really great, and thank you so much, Sarah, for doing that. And I also just really should say, I think it's easy to take for granted how successful this has all been and how much really incredible work that IT's put in to get us where we are. And so the fact that we can even be here talking about adding in meetings is awesome. And I'm confident that a lot of cities are not in the place we're at. So really kudos to your team for that. And this was really helpful to get a sense of the work effort that's going to be needed moving forward. I would say the communications work group. So this is not one that I would say should take priority over PSRC or something like that. On the other hand, I think just based on that memo, since it's an all Alder work group, we should all be already set up in Zoom. We've already tested our devices, et cetera. I think in that case, it would be, just making sure that Lisa Veldrin gets the training needed to sort of help facilitate as the staff member for that body. But I'm thinking that might be a relatively small lift to get that one going. So I think some of these might have different requirements to get them going. And as long as they're in that type 2 category where it's not really a scheduling issue, I think we might be able to get more of those type 2s up and going, really just considering what the training and IT testing requirements are for the members of those groups. So that's one I would just say seems like something we could get going pretty quickly. Again, it's not critically urgent, although we just had probably a couple 4 or 5 meetings left to sort of wrap up that work. And the longer we put it off, the more distance it becomes and the more risk that we just sort of lose that work. So that's one. I think there's a traffic calming ad hoc committee that was formed right before this all happened. It actually was scheduled to have our first meeting the day before the Safer at Home order. Some really important work there. And again, those are all members of either the Transportation Commission or the TPPB who have already had virtual meetings, and I think and chairs and support staff that have already run those. So again, I'm thinking that should be a really low lift for them to be able to meet. So that would one that I'd like to be able to meet. And then I think the other that was mentioned tonight is that the Gulf Task Force. So again, seems like maybe this doesn't rise to the top, but the reason that was formed was really around a really pressing budget issue. And I think that we are going to have, we all know we're going to have an incredibly tough budget, and they also were making really incredible progress. And I think, within a few more meetings, really could put forward a recommendation that I think may really help us with what's going to be an incredibly difficult budget. So, that's another one where I would say, boy, if we could do that, if not, if we wait several months for it, it's just going to take that much more effort to kind of get it rolling again. So those are 3 that I just wanted to have on the radar.
Thank you, Alder Foster. Alder Heck.
Just with regard to the survey, in the draft, it encouraged chairs to talk to their committee members, but I like the way that Alder Foster framed it. We could reiterate that and say, please send this to your committee members for one-way feedback. But I still think it's feasible for just the chairs to submit the surveys. It'll be rather overwhelming, I think, to do anything with that information if we survey everybody. But I like the way that you framed that, and we can add that, I think. Thanks.
Thank you. Alder Martin is next. Go ahead.
Okay. Thank you. First of all, I want to say that I'm really happy about how productive this meeting has been, and I think that we're getting closer to what we all want and moving Madison forward in terms of our recovery and what we have to do now in this emergency. I wanted to also kind of agree with Alder Foster about the language of having suggesting or telling committee chairs that they can survey their members and then compile that information to send back to us and kind of put it on the committee chairs and if they find it to be prudent or not. So I want to thank Alder Foster for bringing up that idea. Thank you.
Thank you. Alder Furman.
Thank you, Council President. I want to just throw out a suggestion and then also add some feedback on Sarah's incredibly awesome and long memo. I would suggest when it comes to the survey, it sounds like we're all in pretty strong agreement that it's pretty close to ready to go out. And so I'm sure there are a few people here that would be willing to take responsibility on gathering any additional feedback members might have via email and then trying to finalize and get something out. I think we need to give committee chairs. I think the thought was when we were talking about the survey about a week to get back to us, but we certainly want to get this information as quickly as possible. So I'm hopeful we can get to a point in our conversation tonight to agree that if people had feedback tonight, great, we could add it. Otherwise, send some notes if there are some minor tweaks, but it looks like we're very, very close to being able to have a final survey. I'm very appreciative of the efforts the IT team put together to get these meetings going. I actually said to Sarah that I was actually a little disappointed that it went so well because I didn't think people were going to be able to appreciate how much work was put into it. And I think that memo did an incredible job to show how that meeting went off almost flawlessly. In fact, flawlessly, I'd like to say, because it did. It was amazing, and that was because of all the work her team did. And so I'm grateful for that work, and also grateful now there's a product that shows what went into that and kind of the whole process. The biggest thing I wanted to point out that I'm very concerned about is public access. I think when these committees are meeting, we need to remember that the public needs to be able to know what's going on. I was thinking about this a little bit today. I'm always disappointed that there are committee meetings I go to that there isn't enough information on Registar about those items. And when you go to the meeting, you see presentations shown to you that aren't in Registar. And so, if I'm a member of the public that's interested, it's very hard for me to know what's going to be presented there if I can't see the presentation, but at least if I show up, I could see the presentation. I think it's incredibly important, obviously, for us to continue to try to get better about that, but I think it shows the need for this video to be available to everybody, because if I can just call in because my kids are using the computer at that point doing homework and I just don't have the time to get to that meeting, if I have no ability to go back and watch that meeting, I think that's going to be a huge problem. So I think we just need to continue to remember that while people obviously going downtown wasn't ideal, but it did make it very, very accessible, much more accessible. I love the fact that we're all able to sit in our homes now and do this, and people are able to sit in their homes and participate. But we need to remember that we need to have as many options available to participate and watch this content. And so the biggest issue I had was the idea that there would be meetings that would not be recorded and not be available to be seen later on. And so when we're getting Alder Foster talked about a lot of different committees getting up, and why don't we just get them going? Obviously, there are limited resources, so we need to be smart about this, and we're going to go through the survey stuff, but I think we also need to remember that, again, there needs to be public access to everything we're doing. Thank you.
Thank you, Alder Furman. Next is Alder Campbell.
Yes to the survey. great job. Do it. Looks good. As far as the committees go, the President's Work Group on Surveillance no longer exists, and I hope we will be voting on the fruits of that work group next week, both in CCEC and at Council. So strike that off the list. And as far as Alder-only groups that can get going quickly, the TFOG's implementation is designed to be an Alder-only group, and it will be working on recommendations around things like supporting better training of committee chairs to get everything in Legistar, for example. I mean, there's just so many really good common sense recommendations that are even more urgent to get going now, and that will make even more sense to us now that we're in these strange times. So I once again would ask that that committee be appointed and be able to start working. The other one is Equal Opportunities Commission, which is listed here as dealing with unemployment, but really what EOC has been dealing with for the last 2 years is housing and evictions and issues around discrimination in housing. And there's been a ton of work put into that by EOC, and I think they are going to need to come online by next month to start helping with, thinking about this eviction tsunami issue and other housing issues, as well as fulfilling their role in the state statute. I believe they have, statutory powers to be hearing appeals, complaint appeals, et cetera, et cetera. So I want to advocate for that one getting up and going soon.
Thank you. Alder Harrington McKinney.
Thank you, Madam President. I didn't realize that I still had my hand up, but anyway,
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, I do want to, there's been a lot of conversation about access to the community doing, and we must be really mindful of that access in terms of communities that don't have a computer. Like when we were meeting downtown, the general public did not come down to the public safety review of to our meetings, excuse me. The other piece is that to really begin to look at how we are engaging populations that are not normally engaged. I mean, we can talk about, the avenue of public input, but it can't be just conversation, because we are missing the input of those populations that many of our decisions impact in such a significant way. And so even having the virtual meetings, people are coming on board that had not been coming on board before. But we need to be looking at access. And in our conversation, let's not lose sight is that we have a population that has been so impacted by this virus. I mean, impacted more so than any of us will ever know. But those are the voices that don't get a chance to come to the table. And we represent those as well. And so I just want to make sure that that stays on the forefront of our decision making and how we do business and how we are inclusive. Thank you.
Thank you, Alder Harrington McKinney. Alder Foster.
Thank you. I just wanted to reinforce a comment that Alder Furman made, and Alder McKinney also mentioned it, but I think this has come up in a few of our conversations, and I think the need to, actually it was in Sarah's memo as well, it was this question of the equity lens. I wonder if this should maybe even just be an item on our next CCEC agenda to talk about, in at least for the time being in this virtual meeting space. Are there any additional things we can do to help lower some of the barriers for access and make sure that they are as open as possible? I for one have seen in the meetings that I've done so far, we've had much more public participation than we have had in person for many of them. And I think, again, one of the consensus recommendations from TFOGs was to get every one of our BCCs available for remote participation. And so I would hate to stop ourselves from using this technology because it's not perfect or we don't have perfect access for everyone. But I also think we should really focus on making sure that it is as accessible as possible. So I'm sure different folks have different ideas about how we could make some improvements there, at least in the longer term. So I think getting that conversation started would be a good idea at some point soon.
Great. If anybody wants to work on a proposal or some ideas around that, please make sure to connect with me and bring them forth so that we can kind of focus the conversation. I don't see any other hands up, so I'll just, and we are past the 8 o'clock that I had mentioned. So a couple of things. I do think that I appreciate the conversation around equity, something that is very present in my mind. I like to mention, for example, one group of people who would have a lot of difficulty joining us remotely and being served in a way that is comfortable, which is people with disabilities, people who use American Sign Language, and limited English proficient individuals, because this kind of just way that we are doing it just makes it a lot more complicated. Not unsurmountable, but I'm just saying complicated and that we need to think about and talk about. So I think that's a good conversation for us to have. So I heard that everybody's on board with sending the survey to the chairs, and we can finalize then the language of the survey and send it to the chairs. I heard also there was no disagreement with the committees that are being proposed at tier 2, just additions to those. And so we'll take those back and see how many committees we can really fit within the, again, the availability of days of the week and the IT staff. And then as far as the next meeting, we will schedule a meeting then on the 21st prior to our council meeting. Again, it will be we will have to make sure that we are finishing it with enough time to allow the IT staff to set up for the council meeting. Does that sound all good? Okay, any final thoughts by any of the alders? I do want to take a minute because this is Alder Roar's last meeting that she is sitting on CCC, although she hasn't been a member. She's been attending every meeting that she has been able to. So thank you so much. And thank you for all the work that you have done for this CCC meeting. And really, it's been an enormous pleasure to have you. We'll say more on Tuesday, but you know, it's never enough to be said about a great alder. So thank you. I see no other alders with their hands up, so I'll take a motion for adjournment at this time. Alder Martin.
Move adjournment.
And then Alder Harrington McKinney.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Unless you raise your hand. Alder Evers, you have your hand raised? Yes? No. Okay, so I see no hands raised, then we will take that as a unanimous motion for adjournment. Thank you so much, everybody. Have a great evening.